Good morning, students. Yesterday, in our video on nomadic tribes, we had seen that how the Mongol society and how the Mongol life was being transformed after becoming world conquerors, because now they were ruling over huge expanse of sedentary kingdoms and empires, and they might have had a nomadic life for generations and centuries, but now they had to adapt themselves to the sedentary and the stationary way of life, because now the rules that were applicable, or rather, nomadic life had no rules actually. And now the sedentary life and stationary life is all about rules and discipline and the structures, and this is how it needs to be done, and this is the time when it needs to be done, and this is what it should be, and that is what it not should be. So all of that led to a great amount of change within the thinking and ideology and mentality of the Mongol leadership. And we ended yesterday with the fact that yes, they were becoming, ironically, less and less brutal than what they earlier were. Of course, they were as lethal and they were an extremely efficient fighting force. There was no compromise on that. But then they understood one very important thing, that earlier they used to move around where they were just Mongols and Mongols and Mongols, and then they could afford to be and murderers and plunderers and rapists and vandals and all those kind of adjectives, and they were very proud of those titles actually. But then now, if you're ruling over people from various cultures who probably and there would be a lot of people, population, who would not prefer that kind of life at all. So naturally, you cannot force them to become looters and plunderers and vandals all the time. So naturally, you have to reserve now these instincts for, when you really encounter very tough situation or extremely harsh enemy, then these treatments were now reserved only for them. Of course, not that Mongols had forgotten about it, but Mongols now reserve these things when the going actually got very, very tough. Not at the drop of a hat like they used to, because in earlier times this was the only thing that they knew, right? Killing and murdering and plundering. But now they reserve these behaviors when, for special occasions, if I may say. So, for today, we start with the next page, that is. Now, Ghazan Khan's speech was the first Khanid ruler to convert to Islam. He gave the following speech to the Mongol Turkish nomad commanders, a speech that was probably drafted by his Persian vizier Rashiduddin and included in the minister's letters. I'm not on the side, guys. This is what it is about. What we have been discussing since yesterday. I'm not on the side of the Persian peasantry. If there is a purpose in pillaging them all, there is no one with more power to do this than I, right? Let us rob them together. But if you wish to be certain of collecting grain and food for your tables in future, I must be harsh with you. You must be taught a lesson. If you insult the peasantry, take their oxen, and seed and trample their crops into the ground, what will you do in future? The obedient peasantry must be distinguished from the peasantry who are rebels. So this is what needs. This is the change in mentality that I'm talking about, right? When they were just moving here and there, today here, tomorrow there, and then day after probably Roorkee and then Saharanpur, so they really never bothered the areas which they were crossing. They would just loot and plunder, and then they would just move on and on and on. But now, when you start living a stationary life, when the people you rule over are stationary people, when you're ruling over towns and villages and massive cities, then you have to understand that yes, those people need food tomorrow as well, day after tomorrow as well. right? Now, if you keep on looting and plundering, then it becomes very difficult to ensure civic life and a predictable civic life within your own kingdom. So, from Genghis Khan's reigns itself, the Mongols had recruited civil administrators from conquered societies. They were sometimes moved around. Chinese secretaries deployed in China, in Iran, and the Iranians in China. They helped in integrating the distant dominions, and their backgrounds and training were always useful in blunting the harsher edges of nomadic predation on sedentary life. The Mongol Khans trusted them as long as they continued to raise revenue for their masters, and these administrators could sometimes command considerable influence. In 1230, the Chinese minister Yelu Chutsai muted some of Ogaday's more rapacious instincts. Now, what is meant by rapacious? It essentially means very aggressive, very greedy instincts. Uh, the Juwaini family played a similar role in Iran through the latter half of the 13th century, and at the end of the century, the Wazir Rashiuddin drafted a speech that Kazan Khan delivered to his Mongol compatriots, asking them to protect, not harass the peasantry, which is there in the box and that we just read. So essentially, it is trying to tell you that yes, as Mongol Empire expanded into Persia and Europe and all the different parts of the world, that is the European subcontinent as well as Asia, naturally they interacted with great people, very talented men of learning and everything, and naturally it was having an effect on the Mongols as well. And since there is one thing which another great man, which is, I don't know if it's there in this chapter, but I don't think it is there. But let's see. The pressure to sedentarize was greater in new areas of Mongol domicile, areas distant from the original steppe habitat of the nomads. By middle of 13th century, the sense of a common patrimony shared by all the brothers were gradually replaced by individual dynasties, each ruling their separate ulus, a term which now carried the sense of a territorial dominion. We had seen it in our previous videos where when we were studying about how Genghis Khan had divided the whole empire among his sons. That is when this term was used, and this was in part a result of succession struggles where Genghis Khan descendants competed for the office of Great Khan and prized pastoral lands. Descendants of Tuli had come to rule. Guys, it is very obvious that when Genghis Khan divided his empire, naturally different commanders and the sons were given different parts to rule, right? And the gradual separation of the descendants of Genghis Khan into separate lineage groups implied that their connections with the memory and traditions of the past family concordance was also changed. At an obvious level, this was the result of competition among the cousin clans, and the Toluid branch was much more adept in presenting their version of the family disagreements in the histories produced under their patronage. Now, guys, that is essentially trying to tell you that yes, uh, again, that the whole mechanism was now changing because Mongols, they never had an empire like that. There was only one great Khan, and every time that Khan was the great Khan, who would be elected, by the Mongol chiefs after the death of every great Khan, that is the Khan, and that or whoever their head was, and then after the Kurultai, they would again re-elect or elect rather someone, and then again he becomes the head, and they would all work under him, and then again after his death, well, new Khan would be elected, and that's the tradition how it was. But for the first time, they now had umpires. So naturally now, the sons and the great generals had to be assigned territories. Earlier, they just moved in herds and hordes and hordes. Today, Dehradun, tomorrow Roorkee, day after tomorrow probably Saharanpur and those kind of things. Now, they did not. They just kept moving in the early times, but now they did not. They now had the responsibility to assign someone with the administration of Dehradun, assign someone with the revenue of Dehradun, then someone with the whole administration, the military, the revenue administration of Saharanpur, Roorkee. Now, all that you needed to ensure that yes, there were responsible people assigned for these responsibilities, because now you needed a steady flow of cash, you needed a steady income, food grains, all that needed to be now taken care of. And that's what it is saying here. To a large extent, this was the consequence of the control of China and Iran and large number of literati that its family members could recruit. At a far more sophisticated level, the disengagement with the past also meant underlining the merits of the regnant rulers as the contrast to the other past monarchs. This exercise in comparison did not exclude Genghis Khan himself. Persian chronicles produced in Al Khanid, Iran, during the 13th century detailed the gory killings of Great Khan and the greatly exaggerated the number scale. So essentially, students, but then I don't think it is mentioned here, so I must tell this to you. Um, mm, um, Probably I'll do it tomorrow. Um, Following the research of David Ayalon, recent work on Yasa, the code of law that Genghis Khan was supposed to have promulgated in the Kurultai of 1206, had elaborated on the complex ways in which the memory of the great Khan was fashioned by his successors. In his earliest formulation, the term was written as Yasak, which meant law. But guys, this is a very important sentence which is coming. Indeed, the few details that we possess about the Yasak concern administrative regulations, uh, the organization of the hunt, the army, the postal system. Guys, you can imagine. Just look at what Genghis Khan and his Mongols have to worry now about. Postal system of all things. Now, do you think a nomad really needed these for centuries? They would have ever cared about postal system like that? Now they have to, because they are now leading over empires and kingdoms and massive geographies which are all stationary, right? They are not moving. So the Mongols had started using the related term Yasa in a more general sense to mean the legal code of Genghis Khan. So, students, the legal code of Genghis Khan was very important, and because his successors had to, they got their legitimacy by, because you have to understand one very important fact, which is that now they were ruling over such massive geography that the Mongols were themselves a minority, right? This is a very important and crucial point. Now you are ruling over massive territories, that's fine, but you are numerically, demographically, you yourself a minority. It was exactly the kind of situation with the British faced in India or in any other continent or country where they ruled. Like, for example, I can tell you for Indians at least, because India had a massive population. It always had a massive population. So British were ruling over crores and crores of people, where they themselves, they were barely about a lakh Britishers or 1.5 lakh Britishers in India. Right? So, do you think they were able to do this only because of the brutality and just killing and beheading and hanging Indians? No, that's not how you rule. You can't. Then there would be all chaos and mayhem, and then everything falls flat. Neither the colonizers enjoy ruling you, neither they can make money, and it's only headache and headache and headache. So to make that system work, British, as you can see, they introduced many number of reforms in India. They introduced railways, engineering colleges, medical colleges, civil services, you name it, right? Hindu marriage laws, Islamic laws, all of that they had to get into, because if they knew that if they had to rule India, and that too with where there would be barely 2 lakh Britishers and ruling over 30 crore Indians, then you needed to ensure that there were systems in place. Otherwise, it is impossible to rule. We shall continue. Thanks.